She is no longer your kind. Lakota elders' words to Cowboy became his greatest awakening. The endless stretches of grass and the endless sky above had been his companions for as long as he could remember. From the moment he could walk, Jack had felt more at home on horseback than anywhere else. The rhythm of the land, the gentle sway of a saddle, and the sound of hooves against soft earth had become his natural language. People often called him a cowboy, but to Jack, that word didn't fully capture who he was. Being a cowboy was more than just working with cattle or riding through storms. It was a way of life, a code that demanded resilience, patience, and independence. Jack lived alone on a modest ranch that had been in his family for generations. The house was small but sturdy, made of weathered wood that had seen decades of sun, rain, and snow. The walls were lined with memories, photographs of ancestors in wide-brimmed hats, old tools that had helped build the land, and letters that spoke of family hardships and triumphs. Jack had inherited this land not only as property but as a responsibility, and he treated it with reverence. Every morning, he would rise before dawn, brew a strong cup of coffee, and step outside to greet the day. The smell of fresh earth, the soft mist rising from the fields, and the distant calls of birds became the soundtrack of his mornings. His work was never easy. Jack spent long hours tending to cattle, repairing fences, and checking the water supply in the pastures. He knew the land like the back of his hand, every hill, creek, and hidden pathway, but it was still demanding work. Winters were harsh, with snowdrifts taller than a man, and summers could scorch the earth under a relentless sun. Despite the difficulty, Jack found comfort in the routine. The work kept him grounded, gave him a sense of purpose, and allowed him to avoid thinking too deeply about other things, the loneliness, the regrets, and the emptiness that sometimes crept in during quiet evenings. Jack's reputation in the nearby towns and ranching communities was one of quiet strength. People admired his skills, his resilience, and his ability to handle challenges without complaint. But beneath that tough exterior, there was a part of Jack he rarely showed to anyone. He had a sharp mind and a reflective heart, but years of solitude and pride had built walls around his emotions. He rarely spoke of his fears or doubts, and he avoided asking for help, believing that to do so would be a weakness. Life for Jack was a series of tasks to be completed, challenges to be met, and responsibilities to be honored. Yet, despite his outward strength, there was a subtle, nagging feeling he could not shake, a sense that something was missing. Jack had once known joy beyond his work, laughter that rang through the halls of his house, and companionship that warmed his long nights. He had loved deeply once decades ago, but that chapter of his life had ended, leaving him with memories both sweet and bitter. Over time, he had convinced himself that solitude was safer, that the quiet of the plains was enough to fill the spaces where connection once lived. And so, he focused on survival, on keeping the ranch running, and on maintaining his reputation as a man who could face any challenge alone. Despite this self-imposed isolation, Jack was not entirely cut off from the world. He often traveled to nearby towns to sell cattle, purchase supplies, or attend local gatherings. These events were rare breaks from his routine, opportunities to exchange news, share stories, and observe how others lived their lives. Jack approached these moments with caution, speaking only when necessary, listening more than talking. People saw him as reserved but reliable, a man who would lend a hand if asked but rarely volunteered. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had faced the elements and survived, someone who believed that life could be measured by hard work and perseverance. One summer afternoon, as the sun blazed overhead and the air shimmered with heat, Jack prepared for a trip to a local rodeo gathering. These gatherings were a mixture of tradition and entertainment, a place where ranchers, cowboys, and families came together to celebrate their way of life. Jack had attended many in the past, but this time, something felt different. There was a restlessness in him, a curiosity that he could not explain. He packed his gear carefully, boots, hat, gloves, and a worn leather jacket that had seen years of use, and saddled his horse, Thunder, who had been his companion for over a decade. Thunder seemed to sense Jack's mood, prancing slightly and nuzzling him gently as if encouraging him onward. As Jack rode through the familiar trails leading away from his ranch, he allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. The plains stretched endlessly on either side, golden grass swaying in the warm breeze. Jack felt the familiar comfort of the land, but also a strange awareness that the world beyond his routines might hold experiences he had long ignored. He thought about the people he would see at the rodeo, the stories they would share, and the laughter that would fill the air. Though he had convinced himself that he preferred solitude, a small part of him wondered if there was more to life than work and routine. Jack's thoughts drifted to the stories he had heard as a boy. Tales of cowboys who had traveled far and met people from different walks of life. Stories of courage, kindness, and lessons learned in unexpected ways. He remembered his father's words. "The land teaches you many things, son, but the people will teach you even more if you listen." Those words, long forgotten in the busyness of daily life, began to surface in Jack's mind, stirring a curiosity he had suppressed for years. He realized that the rodeo gathering might be more than just a social event. It might be an opportunity to encounter something beyond his own understanding, a chance to see life from a perspective he had long ignored. The sun began its slow descent toward the horizon as Jack approached the outskirts of the gathering. The air was filled with the mingling scents of horses, leather, and freshly cooked food. Laughter and music floated on the wind, and the sound of hooves and human voices created a rhythm that was both chaotic and inviting. Jack guided Thunder toward a quiet area at the edge of the gathering, preferring to observe from a distance rather than dive into the crowd. He watched children chase each other across the fields, families sharing stories under the shade of trees, and fellow cowboys exchanging friendly jabs and advice. For the first time in many years, Jack felt a faint sense of belonging, a connection not to the land alone, but to the people who lived alongside it. As the evening settled in, Jack noticed an older man standing apart from the crowd. There was a calmness in his posture, a quiet authority that drew Jack's attention. The man's eyes held a depth that spoke of experience, wisdom, and a life lived with intention. Jack felt an inexplicable pull toward him, a curiosity that he could not ignore. Without fully understanding why, he guided Thunder closer, sensing that this encounter might mark the beginning of something important. At that moment, Jack had no idea that this meeting would challenge everything he believed about himself and the world. He could not have predicted that the words spoken by this elder would awaken something within him, a realization that the life he had known, though familiar and safe, was only a part of what he was capable of understanding, feeling, and becoming. The plains had shaped him, the land had taught him resilience, but it was the people he had yet to truly see who would open the door to his greatest awakening. And so, Jack's journey toward understanding, humility, and connection quietly began, under the vast Montana sky, with the rhythm of hooves on soft earth and the whisper of wind through the golden grass. The cowboy, strong and self-reliant, was about to face lessons that would stretch far beyond his routines, beyond his pride, and into the depths of his own heart. Jack guided Thunder carefully along a narrow trail that wound through the edges of the gathering. The laughter, music, and chatter from the main area faded behind him, replaced by the soft whisper of the wind through the tall grass. The cowboy felt a quiet tension, a sense that something unusual awaited him. His curiosity, which he had felt growing all day, now pulled him forward with a gentle but insistent force. He did not yet know what he would find, only that he had to see it. Through a small clearing, he spotted the man he had noticed earlier. The elder stood beside a weathered wooden fence, his posture relaxed but commanding, like someone who had spent decades observing the world and its people. His face was lined with age and experience, but his eyes were sharp and clear, holding a depth that seemed to look beyond the surface of things. Jack felt a mix of caution and fascination. He had met many people in his life, but few had given him the impression that they could see right through him. The elder turned slightly, acknowledging Jack with a gentle nod. Without a word, he gestured toward an empty space near the fence, inviting him to sit. Jack dismounted slowly, patting Thunder's neck and whispering a soft word of thanks to his loyal companion. As he led the horse to a nearby post, he felt a growing awareness that this encounter was not a chance meeting. Something about the elder's presence stirred a quiet expectation in Jack's chest, as if he was standing on the edge of a lesson he had long needed but never sought. Finally, he sat down on the fence rail, feeling the rough wood beneath his hands. The elder spoke in a calm, steady voice that seemed to carry the rhythm of the earth itself. "You have traveled far today," he said. "Yet, it is not the distance you have covered on horseback that matters. It is the journey you have carried within yourself." Jack blinked, slightly taken aback. Few people had ever spoken to him in a way that felt direct yet gentle. He shifted, trying to find the right words, but the elder continued, unhurried. "Many walk this land thinking they are alone. They see the earth, the animals, the sky, and believe that these are their companions. Yet there is more to see, more to understand. Have you ever stopped to look beyond the surface of your life?" Jack felt a flicker of defensiveness rise within him. He was a man who had lived through harsh winters, relentless work, and solitude that would have broken others. He had survived, provided for himself, and maintained his land. "I see enough," he muttered, trying to sound confident. "I've lived my life. The land teaches plenty if you pay attention." The elder smiled softly, but there was no judgment in his expression. "The land teaches much, yes," he said, "but life is not only in the soil, the sky, or the herds. Life is in the connections we make, in the respect we offer to others, and in the lessons we carry from those we meet. You have strength, cowboy, but strength alone does not lead to understanding." Jack frowned, feeling an uncomfortable tug at his pride. No one had ever challenged him like this. He had always prided himself on his independence, on his ability to survive and thrive without leaning on anyone. Yet the elder's words were not harsh or demanding. They were calm, like water carving a path through rock. And in that calmness, Jack felt the first stirrings of curiosity, a desire to hear more, even if it meant confronting parts of himself he had long avoided. The elder then shared a story. "Many years ago," he began, "my people faced hardships that no one else could imagine. We lost lands, families, and ways of life that had existed for generations. Yet through all of this, we learned that survival is not only about strength or skill. It is about respect, humility, and the courage to see the truth, even when it is uncomfortable. You carry pride in your work, in your independence, but there is a truth you have yet to see within yourself." Jack listened quietly, feeling a mixture of intrigue and unease. The story was simple, yet its meaning felt layered, like the echoes of something he had always known but refused to face. He shifted on the fence, his hands gripping the wood as he tried to make sense of the feelings rising within him. The elder's words were planting seeds, seeds of reflection, of questioning, and of self-awareness, that Jack could not yet fully understand. For a long moment, neither spoke. The wind rustled the grass, and the distant sounds of the gathering faded further. Jack's thoughts wandered back to his life on the ranch. The long, solitary hours, the routines that kept him busy, the quiet evenings spent staring at the stars. Had he truly been living, or had he merely been existing? The elder's calm presence made him confront a question he had avoided for decades. Was he seeing life as it really was, or only through the narrow lens of his own pride and habit? Then the elder leaned slightly forward, his eyes meeting Jack's. "There is something you must understand," he said gently, but with weight behind his words. "Some things, some people, some paths will not be yours to hold. They are not yours because they belong to life itself, not to the pride or the habit of a man." Jack felt a chill despite the warmth of the evening sun. He had not expected words like this, nor had he considered that someone could speak so clearly about the truths he had buried. "I don't understand," he admitted. "I've worked hard, I've done my best. What are you saying?" The elder smiled again, but this time there was a gravity that made Jack sit a little straighter. "She is no longer your kind," he said simply. "Not because you are unworthy, but because life moves and we do not always move with it. You must see who you are, who you have become, and what you have missed while thinking that life is only about strength and survival." The words struck Jack like a sudden gust of wind. He thought of the people he had loved, the relationships he had neglected, and the small kindnesses he had ignored. He realized that the phrase was not directed at him as a judgment, but as a mirror, reflecting the distance he had created between himself and the world, between himself and the connections that truly mattered. The elder continued, telling stories of people who had lived lives much like Jack's, strong, independent, and skilled, but who had missed the depth of life because they had closed their hearts to learning and understanding. Each story seemed to echo in Jack's mind, stirring memories and emotions he had long pushed aside. He remembered his late wife, the warmth of her laughter, the conversations they had shared under the stars. He remembered friends he had grown apart from, neighbors he had avoided, and moments when a small act of kindness could have changed a situation for the better. Jack began to realize that the elder's presence was a gift, a rare opportunity to see life through a perspective he had denied himself. The elder did not lecture or demand change. He simply shared wisdom, stories, and reflections that made Jack question his own path. For the first time in decades, he felt a willingness to listen, to absorb, and to consider that his life might hold more than routine, work, and pride. As the sun dipped lower behind the hills, casting long shadows across the plains, Jack felt a strange mix of humility and curiosity. He had come to the gathering expecting entertainment and perhaps some social connection, but he had found something far greater, a mirror to his own soul, a challenge to see life as it truly was, and the beginning of a journey he could not yet fully imagine. Finally, Jack spoke, his voice quiet but sincere. "I don't fully understand your words," he admitted, "but I want to. I want to learn what I have been missing." The elder nodded, his eyes reflecting both patience and quiet encouragement. "Then you have already begun," he said. "Awareness is the first step. The next steps will require courage, humility, and a willingness to face truths you may have long ignored. But know this, every step you take toward understanding will bring you closer to life, to others, and to yourself." Jack felt the weight of those words settle in his chest. He sat on the fence long after the elder had finished speaking, watching the plains stretch endlessly before him. For the first time, he sensed that the life he had known, though familiar and comforting, was only part of a much larger journey. There was a world of understanding, connection, and meaning waiting beyond the routines he had clung to for so long. And though he could not yet see the full path ahead, he knew that this encounter would mark the beginning of something extraordinary. The evening deepened into night, and the sounds of the gathering became faint echoes. Jack finally mounted Thunder again, feeling a quiet resolve taking root. He did not yet know how this meeting would change him, but he knew that the words, "She is no longer your kind," would linger in his mind, a puzzle, a challenge, and a guide. As he rode back toward his ranch under a sky filled with stars, Jack felt the first stirrings of awakening, a sense that life was more than survival, more than routine, and more than pride. For the first time in years, he was not just a cowboy riding the plains. He was a man beginning to awaken to the possibilities of understanding, connection, and transformation. After his encounter with the elder, Jack could not shake the words that had struck him so deeply. "She is no longer your kind." The phrase echoed in his mind during the long ride back to his ranch, weaving through his thoughts like a persistent wind. At first he tried to dismiss it, telling himself that the elder was speaking in riddles, that he was reading too much into simple words. Yet the more he tried to ignore it, the louder it became. It clung to him, a quiet challenge he could not avoid. When Jack returned to his ranch, he went through his usual routines mechanically. He checked on the cattle, repaired a fence that had been weakened by a recent storm, and filled the water troughs. The sun had just begun to dip behind the distant hills, casting long shadows across the land. Everything seemed the same, yet nothing felt the same. The familiar rhythm of his life, the chores, the solitude, the quiet evenings, suddenly felt incomplete. The elder's words had opened a door in Jack's mind, and he could not simply close it again. That evening, Jack sat alone on the porch, leaning back against the worn wooden railing, his hands resting loosely on his knees. The sky above was a deep, rich blue, scattered with the first stars of night. Normally, he would have felt a sense of peace in this moment, comforted by the vastness of the plains and the quiet that surrounded him. But tonight he felt something different, a restlessness, a stirring in his chest that he could not name. He thought about his life, the choices he had made and the people he had loved, and in that reflection he felt a pang of regret. Memories surfaced unexpectedly. He remembered his late wife, Margaret, and the warmth she had brought to his life. They had shared laughter, whispered dreams, and long walks under the open sky. He remembered her gentle voice urging him to see the world differently, to notice the small joys, the lives of others, and the beauty that existed beyond his own struggles. Jack had loved her deeply, yet after her passing, he had buried those lessons beneath layers of routine and pride. The emptiness he sometimes felt now seemed connected to that neglect, a reminder that he had ignored the deeper parts of life that Margaret had once shown him. Jack's thoughts then turned to his neighbors and friends. He realized how often he had been distant, too focused on his own work and pride to reach out, to offer help without expectation, or to truly listen. There had been opportunities, small moments when a kind word or a helping hand could have made a difference, but he had turned away. His independence, which he had always valued as a strength, now seemed to have become a barrier, keeping him from connecting with others in meaningful ways. The phrase, "she is no longer your kind," began to take on new meaning in Jack's mind. He realized it was not only about a person, but about life itself, the connections, the relationships, and the respect that he had overlooked. It was a warning, a mirror reflecting the distance he had created between himself and the world he lived in. The elder's words were not an accusation but an invitation to see clearly, to confront the ways he had isolated himself, and to consider the possibilities of change. Over the next few days, Jack found himself observing the world differently. While working in the fields, he noticed the way the wind moved through the grass, the subtle patterns of animal behavior, and the small details of nature he had previously ignored. These observations, which once seemed mundane, now felt alive with meaning. Even the faces of the townspeople during his trips to sell cattle or buy supplies seemed more significant. He began to wonder about their lives, their struggles, and the stories that shaped them. It was as if a veil had been lifted, revealing layers of life that he had not fully seen before. Despite these insights, Jack's inner conflict grew. He felt a tension between his old habits, the routines, pride, and solitude he had always relied on, and the new awareness the elder had awakened in him. Some mornings, he would rise with determination, ready to face the day with curiosity and openness. By midday, he would feel frustration, questioning why he needed to change, why he could not simply continue living as he always had. The pull of familiarity was strong, and yet the whisper of something greater persisted, urging him forward. One afternoon, as Jack rode through the pastures checking on the cattle, he thought about the elder again. He remembered the calmness in the man's eyes, the way he spoke without hurry, and the sense that every word carried weight. Jack realized that this encounter had stirred a reflection he could not have achieved alone. The elder had shown him that life was more than survival, more than routine, and more than pride. It was about connection, respect, and understanding. And yet, Jack knew that awareness alone was not enough. Transformation required effort, courage, and a willingness to confront truths that were uncomfortable. That evening, Jack sat by the fireplace, letting the warmth wash over him as he considered the next steps in his journey. He thought about the people he had neglected, the friendships he had let fade, and the moments when he had chosen work over connection. A quiet resolve began to form within him, a determination to reach out, to listen, and to act with intention. He did not yet know how to do this, or how the changes would unfold, but he felt a spark of hope that things could be different. As the days passed, Jack began small experiments in kindness and connection. He offered assistance to a neighbor struggling with a broken fence, shared advice and encouragement with a young rancher learning the trade, and even took time to sit and listen to the stories of those around him. Each action, though simple, brought a sense of fulfillment he had not felt in years. He began to understand that life was not only about survival or work, it was about the impact he had on others and the ways he chose to engage with the world. At night, Jack often found himself returning to the elder's words, repeating them quietly to himself. "She is no longer your kind." He reflected on how these words applied to more than a single person, extending to his relationships, his connection with nature, and the choices he had made that had created distance. Each time he considered the phrase, he felt both discomfort and curiosity, a tension that pushed him to examine his life more deeply. Jack also began to dream in ways he had not for years. The dreams were vivid and often unsettling, showing him moments from his past where he had acted out of pride or stubbornness, as well as glimpses of the possibilities that might arise if he chose a different path. These dreams were not easy to face, but they became a guide, offering insight into the changes he needed to make. He began keeping a small journal, recording his reflections, observations, and the feelings that arose from both his daily life and his dreams. Through this process, Jack realized that the journey of self-reflection was not linear. Some days brought clarity and courage, while others brought doubt and resistance. He found himself questioning long-held beliefs, confronting habits that no longer served him, and imagining a life richer in connection and understanding. The awareness that had begun with the elder's words was growing into a commitment to live more fully, to engage with life and others, and to honor the lessons he had long overlooked. One afternoon, as Jack rode along a ridge overlooking his ranch, he felt a sense of clarity he had not experienced in years. The cattle grazed peacefully below, the wind carried the scent of grass and earth, and the sky stretched endlessly above. In that moment, Jack understood that his life was more than the routines he had followed, more than the solitude he had embraced, and more than the pride he had held as armor. Life was dynamic, alive, and filled with opportunities to connect, grow, and understand. The elder's words had opened a door, and now it was up to Jack to walk through it. He dismounted and stood quietly, letting the wind brush against his face. For the first time, he felt a sense of humility, not weakness, but a recognition that he had much to learn, and that true strength came from understanding, empathy, and connection. The words, "She is no longer your kind," no longer felt like a judgment. They felt like a key, unlocking a path toward self-discovery and awakening. Jack knew that the road ahead would not be easy. He would have to confront his pride, repair relationships, and learn to see the world from perspectives beyond his own. There would be moments of doubt, moments when he would question whether change was possible, and moments when old habits threatened to pull him back. Yet he also knew that the first steps had been taken. Awareness had been awakened, and with it, the possibility of transformation. As the sun set behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Jack sat on the ridge and took a deep breath. The plains stretched endlessly before him, filled with the promise of new experiences, new connections, and a deeper understanding of life. The cowboy, once focused solely on survival and pride, had begun to awaken to a larger truth. That life was about connection, empathy, and the courage to see oneself honestly. And so, in the quiet of that evening, Jack Reynolds began the most important journey of his life, not across the plains he had always known, but within himself, toward understanding, growth, and the awakening that the elder's words had begun to inspire. In the days that followed, Jack felt a quiet determination growing inside him. The words of the Lakota elder, "She is no longer your kind," had settled in his mind like seeds waiting to bloom. He could no longer ignore the reflection they had stirred in him. For the first time in many years, he realized that life was not just about surviving, maintaining the ranch, and being independent. There was a deeper way to live, one that involved connection, empathy, and respect. Jack knew he had to take steps, small as they might be, to change the way he lived and thought. The first step came unexpectedly. One morning, Jack noticed that the fence along the edge of his neighbor's property was damaged, likely from a storm that had passed a few days earlier. He thought about ignoring it, as he usually would have. He had his own work to do, but the elder's words came to mind. Without hesitation, Jack saddled Thunder and rode over to help. The neighbor, Mr. Thompson, was an older man who struggled with mobility due to a previous injury. Jack worked steadily, repairing the fence while talking gently with him. "You didn't have to do this, Mr. Thompson said, watching Jack hammer nails and mend broken wood. "I know," Jack replied, "but it seemed like the right thing to do." There was a moment of silence, and then a small smile appeared on Mr. Thompson's face. Jack felt a warmth in his chest he hadn't felt in a long time. It was not pride, nor the satisfaction of completing work on his own land. It was something deeper, a connection formed through an act of kindness without expectation. That evening, as Jack returned to his ranch, he realized that the first step of change had been taken, and it felt both humbling and exhilarating. Over the next few weeks, Jack sought other ways to open himself to life beyond routine. He spent time with neighbors he had previously avoided, offering help and listening to their stories. He found joy in simple conversations, realizing that the lives of others, though different from his, carried wisdom and lessons he had missed. Jack discovered that empathy, patience, and humility were not weaknesses. They were strengths that allowed him to see the world more clearly and live more fully. One afternoon, Jack returned to the Black Hills, drawn by the memory of the elder. He did not know what he would find, but he felt a need to seek guidance, to understand the path that had been opened to him. As he approached the clearing where he had first met the elder, he saw him standing quietly, watching the sky. Jack dismounted, feeling a mix of nervousness and anticipation. "I came to see you again," Jack said. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about life, about myself." The elder nodded, a calm and knowing smile on his face. "You have begun to walk a new path," he said softly. "Awareness is the beginning, but understanding comes through action, reflection, and courage. Tell me, what have you noticed about yourself?" Jack hesitated, then spoke honestly. "I realized I've been alone too much. I ignored people, my neighbors, friends, even my own family at times. I've been proud, stubborn, and closed off. I thought that independence was everything, but I see now that life is more than that. There's connection. There's respect. There's more to see if I'm willing to look." The elder's eyes twinkled. "You see clearly, but seeing is not enough. You must act. You must allow these lessons to guide your daily choices. Life will challenge you, old habits will pull you back. But courage is not the absence of fear, it is moving forward despite it. Jack stayed with the elder for several hours, listening to stories of the Lakota people, their struggles, their resilience, and the lessons they had learned through hardship and compassion. The stories were rich with meaning, but not in a way that demanded change. Instead, they gently nudged Jack to reflect on his own life, to consider how he could live more consciously, and how he could repair the gaps he had created in his relationships. By the time Jack left, the sun was low in the sky, casting a warm glow over the hills. He felt renewed, inspired, and more aware of the responsibility he now carried, not only to himself but to the world around him. Back at the ranch, Jack began implementing changes in his daily routine. He spent mornings helping with chores in the community, offering his skills and knowledge to others without expecting anything in return. He learned to listen more, to be patient, and to observe the lives and struggles of those around him. Each act, no matter how small, strengthened a sense of connection he had long forgotten. The pride he had once held so tightly was slowly transforming into humility, respect, and compassion. One day, Jack visited a young rancher named Eli, who was struggling to care for a herd of cattle while managing repairs on his own land. Jack offered to help, working side by side with Eli for hours. At first, Eli was hesitant, unsure if he could accept assistance, but Jack's sincerity and steady presence quickly earned his trust. Together, they fixed fences, guided the cattle, and shared stories of their lives. Jack realized that this partnership, even temporary, created a bond neither had expected. He felt a joy that had nothing to do with work or accomplishment, but with the simple act of being present and supportive. Jack also began reconnecting with his family. Letters he had long delayed were finally written, messages filled with honesty, appreciation, and care. He made time for conversations with relatives, listening to their experiences and sharing his own reflections. Through these connections, Jack discovered a sense of belonging he had thought was lost. He realized that strength was not measured by solitude or independence alone, but by the ability to engage, support, and learn from those around him. Even Jack's relationship with the land itself changed. He began to see the animals not only as work to be managed, but as living beings deserving of respect. He noticed patterns in their behavior, cared for them more attentively, and felt a growing sense of stewardship rather than mere ownership. Each day, he walked the fields with greater mindfulness, attuned to the sounds, smells, and movements that he had once taken for granted. The land, which had always been a teacher, now became a partner in his journey of awakening. One evening, after a long day of work in the community, Jack returned to his porch and watched the sun dip below the hills. The sky was a canvas of gold and orange, and the wind carried the soft scent of grass and earth. He felt a deep sense of peace, not the fleeting comfort of routine, but a profound calm that came from connection, reflection, and purposeful action. He thought again of the elder's words, now resonating with new clarity. "She is no longer your kind," was no longer confusing or puzzling. It was a reminder that life required openness, attention, and care, and that he was learning to embrace those lessons fully. Over time, Jack noticed a transformation within himself that extended beyond daily actions. He became more patient, more understanding, and more compassionate. He listened without judgment, offered help without expectation, and celebrated the successes of others with genuine joy. Even moments of frustration or conflict were approached with a new mindset, seeking understanding rather than reacting impulsively. The cowboy who had once relied solely on pride and independence was evolving into a man capable of empathy, awareness, and meaningful connection. The changes also affected Jack's inner world. He found himself reflecting less on what he had lost and more on what he could nurture and create. The feelings of emptiness that had sometimes haunted him began to fade, replaced by a sense of purpose and fulfillment that came from engaging fully with life. Jack realized that awakening was not a single moment or event. It was a continuous process, a choice to act consciously, to learn, and to grow each day. As the weeks turned into months, Jack's presence in the community became quietly influential. People noticed the change, though he did not announce it. His actions spoke louder than words, helping neighbors, offering guidance to younger ranchers, listening with attention and care, and tending the land with renewed mindfulness. Jack's life, once solitary and routine, had begun to ripple outward, affecting the lives of others and strengthening the bonds of community. And yet, Jack never forgot the elder or the moment when his journey began. The words, "She is no longer your kind," continued to guide him, reminding him that awakening required courage, reflection, and action. They reminded him that life was not static, that relationships needed care, and that true strength lay in connection, empathy, and awareness. Every day he walked the path of transformation, learning, growing, and embracing the fullness of life he had long overlooked. In the quiet moments, as Jack watched the sunset over the Montana plains, he realized how far he had come. The cowboy who had once believed that survival and pride defined his life was now discovering that life's true richness came from relationships, understanding, and humility. He had begun to awaken not only to the world around him, but also to the world within himself, a journey that would continue for the rest of his days. The months had passed since Jack first met the Lakota elder, and with each day, he felt himself changing in ways he had never imagined. The words, "She is no longer your kind," had become a quiet guide, reminding him to look beyond pride, routine, and solitude. Jack no longer saw life as something to be endured or merely survived. Instead, he saw it as a network of connections, lessons, and opportunities to grow. He had become a man who understood that true strength lay not only in his ability to work the land, but also in his willingness to open his heart to others. Jack's transformation was visible to everyone in the small Montana community. Neighbors who had once thought of him as distant now sought his advice and guidance. Young ranchers, inspired by his willingness to help, approached him with questions about cattle, fences, and life on the plains. Jack treated each encounter with patience and care, listening as much as he spoke, offering insights without arrogance, and celebrating the successes of others with genuine joy. The change in him was subtle yet powerful, and it inspired those around him to reflect on their own lives. One bright morning, Jack received a letter from his cousin Clara, who lived in a nearby town. She wrote about the challenges she had faced in caring for her family, the difficulties of running a small ranch, and the weight of responsibilities that often left her exhausted. Jack realized that he could offer more than advice. He could offer presence, support, and understanding. The next day he rode to her ranch, bringing supplies, tools, and most importantly, a listening ear. He spent hours helping with chores, repairing fences, and simply talking with Clara about her hopes and worries. By the time he left, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment, a connection forged not through obligation, but through care and shared experience. Jack's relationships with the neighbors deepened as well. He had once seen them as distant, perhaps even competitors in the harsh world of ranching. Now, he viewed them as partners in life, people whose struggles and successes were intertwined with his own. He organized small gatherings, shared meals, and listened to stories of hardship and triumph. Through these simple acts, Jack began to understand the power of community, the importance of empathy, and the strength found in mutual support. He saw that life was richer when shared, and he felt a warmth that had been absent from his days for far too long. His relationship with the land had also transformed. Jack now approached his ranch with reverence, understanding that he was not merely working the land for survival, but living in partnership with it. He observed the patterns of the seasons, the needs of the animals, and the subtle signs of change in the fields. Each day became an opportunity to learn, to respect, and to act with care. The land, which had once been a backdrop to his routine, now felt alive with meaning, teaching lessons in patience, resilience, and harmony that Jack had long ignored. One late afternoon, Jack decided to return to the Black Hills to visit the elder once more. He had grown in ways he could not have imagined when they first met, yet he still sought guidance, eager to ensure that he remained on the path of growth. As he approached the clearing, he saw the elder standing quietly, his gaze directed toward the horizon. Jack dismounted, feeling a mix of gratitude and humility. "I've come to thank you," Jack said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Your words changed my life. I don't know if I could have seen what I was missing without them." The elder turned to him and smiled, a deep and knowing expression. "You have done the work yourself, Jack," he said. "I only spoke the words. You chose to listen, to reflect, and to act. True change comes from within. You have awakened to life not because someone told you how to live, but because you were willing to see yourself honestly." Jack felt a wave of humility wash over him. He had once believed that independence and pride defined his life. Now he understood that these qualities alone were insufficient. Real strength came from connection, compassion, and the courage to face one's own limitations. The elder's words had been a catalyst, but it was Jack's own willingness to change that had brought transformation. As they walked together through the hills, the elder shared stories of resilience, respect, and harmony with the natural world. Each story resonated deeply with Jack, reinforcing the lessons he had been learning on his own ranch. He understood that life was a continuous journey of awareness, reflection, and action. The process of awakening was ongoing, and he embraced it fully, knowing that each day offered opportunities to learn, grow, and connect. Returning home, Jack felt a renewed sense of purpose. He continued to engage with his neighbors, offering help and listening with care. He nurtured his relationships with family members, writing letters, making visits, and sharing stories of his experiences. Jack also began mentoring younger ranchers, teaching not only the skills of the trade, but also the values of empathy, respect, and connection that had transformed his own life. Through his actions, he became a quiet leader, someone whose example inspired others to reflect on their own lives and choices. Jack's nights were now filled with reflection rather than solitude. He often sat on his porch, watching the sun set over the plains, thinking about the lessons he had learned and the journey he had undertaken. The emptiness that had once weighed on him had been replaced by fulfillment, purpose, and a sense of belonging. He felt connected to the land, to the people around him, and to the deeper currents of life that had previously been invisible. The cowboy who had once believed that survival and pride defined him was now a man awakened to the richness of life and the power of human connection. One evening, as Jack rode along the ridge overlooking his ranch, he paused to watch a herd of deer moving gracefully across the fields. The sky was painted in shades of pink, gold, and purple, and the wind carried the soft scent of grass and earth. Jack felt a profound sense of peace and gratitude. He thought about the elder's words, once mysterious and challenging, and now clear in their meaning. "She is no longer your kind," was no longer a statement of separation or loss. It was a call to awareness, a reminder that life required openness, empathy, and humility. In that quiet moment, Jack realized that his journey of awakening was not only about himself. It was about the people he touched, the community he nurtured, and the land he cared for. Each act of kindness, each moment of understanding rippled outward, creating a life richer than he had ever imagined. Jack knew that he could never return to the man he had been, and he did not want to. The awakening had changed him fundamentally, shaping a new way of being in the world, one marked by connection, empathy, and a deep respect for life. Jack's story spread quietly through the community. People spoke of his transformation with admiration, not because he sought recognition, but because his actions reflected genuine change. Neighbors and friends began to notice small differences in themselves, inspired by Jack's example. The ripple effect of his awakening extended beyond his ranch, touching lives in subtle but meaningful ways. Jack understood that true transformation was not about fame or accolades, but about the quiet impact one could have on the world through living with awareness, kindness, and purpose. Years later, Jack often returned to the Black Hills, sometimes alone, sometimes with neighbors or family members. He would sit with the elder, sharing stories, listening, and reflecting. The conversations were rich with meaning, but Jack also understood that the real lessons were lived daily on his ranch and within his community. The elder's guidance had sparked a journey, but it was Jack's choices, courage, and willingness to face himself honestly that had made the awakening real and lasting. Jack's life had been transformed, but the process never ended. Each day brought new challenges, new lessons, and new opportunities for connection. He continued to work the land, tend the cattle, and care for his neighbors, but now each task carried meaning beyond the routine. Each interaction became an opportunity to practice empathy, understanding, and respect. Jack had learned that life was not static, it was dynamic, full of lessons waiting to be discovered, and that true awakening required constant attention and humility. On a quiet morning, Jack stood on his porch, looking out over the plains. The sky stretched endlessly above him, the land alive with movement and sound. He felt a deep gratitude for the journey he had undertaken, the awakening that had begun with a chance encounter and a few simple words from an elder. Jack understood now that life was not about possession, pride, or solitude. It was about connection, empathy, and the courage to see oneself honestly. The cowboy who had once ridden alone across the plains had become a man deeply awake to the richness, beauty, and responsibility of life itself. And so, Jack Reynolds continued his journey, carrying the elder's words as a guide, living each day with awareness, and touching the lives of those around him. He had awakened not only to the world but to himself, and in that awakening he had found the true meaning of strength, connection, and life.